Voiceoctober 2022. Your favorite actors being interviewed.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Chris Niosi here, and welcome for the first time in many years to Voiceoctover, where I interview various veterans of the voiceover world. It's been quite a while since I've done one of these, but I'm very excited because this year I wanted to come back with a big splash, and I'm happy to say I'm interviewing quite a bunch of very experienced, incredibly talented folks, veterans and like true veterans of the industry that have done a whole bunch of incredible stuff. And actually my very first one is not one that I planned, but it turned out that we were kind of on a certain wavelength about something we'll get into later. But he is one of the, as far as I'm concerned, one of the best character voiceover actors in the animation world right now. Master impressionist, does the best goddamn match of Jack Black on Kung-Fu Panda and Robert Downey Jr. on Iron Man you've ever heard. He's been everything from Raphael in a Ninja Turtles video game. He's the Joker on the Batman Batwheel series. He is a teacher of voiceover. He's a podcast creator. He does it all. I'm joined by Mick Wingert. How you doing, sir?
Good. I'm glad to be here. It's wonderful to hear that, like, the hard sell there, man. Like, I was, you're thinking I'm gonna come back with a big splash, interview all these veterans, and in my brain I'm thinking, and Mick Wingert.
No. I mean, honest to Christ, I feel like I've followed your career practically since the beginning, because I can still recall when the early Kung Fu Panda video games were coming out. Although, of course, I don't know about your pre-LA stuff, which I want to get into that early. We could start off, because I tend to get the generic crap out of the way. I'm sure you've done this in every interview, but I don't know your tragic actor's backstory from prior to moving to California. I know you did a lot of commercials and stuff.
Sure.
How did the acting bug bite you? What was your early experience, and then when you first moved out here?
Well, my supervillain origin story begins in the fateful town of Fresno, California. I just grew up a theater kid in Fresno, did community theater and that kind of thing. I was a huge fan of cartoons and animation, and when I was growing up, it was like late 70s, early 80s into, I was like middle school into high school in the very end of the 80s decade. So all of the shows that I watched growing up, I probably watched for too many years. And they were all like action, adventure, superhero, fantasy, fulfillment kind of, awesome shows, right? Like we had, G.I. Joe, Transformers, He-Man. We had the one that first captured my imagination was probably Battle of the Planets, which was a rehash of Gatchaman, which
That's right. Yeah.
A really cool thing that I think it was Sandy Frank brought into the States, imported into the States. But anyway, I liked cartoons. I really loved doing theater. I desperately craved attention. We can get into all the therapy related things for that. But, in short, basically, I ended up graduating from university in about 1998, having done various different theater-y kind of things. But I ended up with a degree in mass comm journalism and ended up in advertising. I was working at a department store. Not in the store itself, but in their corporate offices. I was in the ad department writing copy, and it was a completely non-creative process. It was literally like the buyers of the products would bring you as a copywriter, air quotes for those who can't see me. They bring you the buying sheets of whatever item they want to sell, and or that they've bought at market. And you literally just transcribed the details into a Word document so that then the ad directors or the print graphic artists could do all the layout and everything else. So it was just awful. I was sitting in my cube going, there's got to be more to life than this. And so around 2004, I finally moved down here. I took some time off after doing the copywriter thing and did some touring theater with just an amateur company. Nothing big, no big deal. And then when I landed back in the Central Valley for a while and decided, if I'm going to make a go of this, I'm running out of time. So at the age of 30, Mr. Late Bloomer over here finally got his ass down to LA and started really hitting the bricks. I put demos together right before I left, and they were good enough, thankfully, to get me some interest from a couple of agencies. I landed with a very small agency here in town and worked a day job for, a good 4 years or so before I got Kung-Fu Panda, the video game, from the very first film. That was in 2008, so...
That's right, which through my homework, there was a talk that you did a few years ago that I found where you talked about that story that I was surprised about, because I know you don't consider yourself like a, holy crap master of impressions because you have like, the ones that you specialized in, of course, but developing a knack for impressions because studying Jack Black when you were given that opportunity for the Kung Fu Panda audition and everything, and you said that James Arnold Taylor, who I'm also a huge fan, he was the one that kind of got you in the door of that. So how did you get to know kind of the community when you first came down here?
Honestly, I just jumped in through classes back in the day. Tara Strong had put together a CD-ROM class. This is how long ago it was, okay? We're not talking online. There was no YouTube video. It was a CD-ROM you had to send away for, and they sent it to you in a jewel case called Voice Stars. And
I remember that. Yeah.
And I sent away for that, and part of your purchase of the curriculum was the 2 points of interest were, number one, it was you got a chance to work on original sides and have Tara or some other voice star review it. It ended up being Tara, of course. And then the other one was there was like an online forum and community, and so I just through that forum met some folks, and then as I got down here, I ended up renting a room from a man who's still a friend of mine over in the Encino area of the San Fernando Valley, and we had a mutual roommate who went to Bel Air Press, and over at Bel Air Press was James Arnold Taylor, and I was very open about the fact that I'm here to do voiceover, I want to be in cartoons, and so this mutual roommate was like, I know a guy, and he goes to my church, and he's great, and his wife is great, and I should get you all together for dinner sometime. And so he did. He got us all together for dinner. So between like personal connections that just happened to fall into place serendipitously, as well as, I then took classes. When you get into the class atmosphere, at least back in the day when you got into the class atmosphere, there was a couple of different education houses and a couple of different experts. I fell in, one of the people I fell in with, I still consider a mentor and a friend, is Pat Fraley.
Oh yeah, of course.
And so Pat, I took a couple of Pat's workshops and mentored with him, and he became an industry friend. And then as I hit, I just kept trying to nurture those friendships along the way. So between, fellow students in those communities, whether we formed workout groups on our own and just got to be friends, or pros that friends of friends knew. I mean, anyone that comes to Los Angeles, like one of the first things I tell them is, if you know anyone who's in a pro voiceover capacity, offer to buy them coffee and pick their brain and take notes. Bring a pen and a pencil, or a pencil and a paper, and pick their brain and take notes and show that, just to show that you're serious about it. But I honestly wouldn't be where I'm at without the community around me. And so I really try to do the same thing. Like if I know a particular actor that I'm working with who's a student of mine is right for something, I will send them that audition, or I will, not send them auditions because they come from the agency, but I will let them know to tell their agent, or I will let them know to, that there's some casting right now to do some footwork on it. So, I really try to pass it along as much as I can.
Yeah.
Because again, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the helping hands that got me here.
Yeah, and it's funny because often with these kind of stories, like it's like, oh, everybody's path is different, but I feel like a lot of the things you're talking about are very common. They're becoming very common through lines for people now. For a lot of myself and a lot of my contemporaries and things. Because like for me, like I came out here 2014, and I had folks, my equivalent were like Ben Diskin, Mona Marshall, that, I worked with, knew a little bit ahead of time. They saw something in me. They tried to shop me around a little bit. I took the initiative on classes, did Richard Horvith's 6-week thing, which is always a joy. I would recommend that to everybody. And yeah, it's funny because I've only met Pat. Those of you who don't know, Pat Fraley was the original voice of Krang and many Ninja Turtles characters, tons of stuff in the 90s and in 2000.
Yeah.
And is a great teacher. And I think Kyle Hebert also studied with him as well.
He did, yeah.
A big mentor for a lot of folks. And Bob Bergen as well as another guy who's taught a lot of people. I feel like that's a common thread for folks, which is a good sign of like being prepared for when you're going to make the jump to a center as big as California in general. For the note of the impression stuff as well, going back to that for a minute, because what I was so astounded by was when you told the story about, because of course Poe on Kung-Fu Panda is a huge thing for you still to this day, of course.
Yeah.
And the fact that, because I just assume, I'm sure probably that's got to be one he's honed for years, and then to learn that like pretty much before the audition you're like, no, I rented a bunch of movies and just tried to figure it out and happened to work out. That was wow. For when you're developing, because like Robert Downey is another big one, of course. When you're developing a celebrity impression or voice match of any kind, because I know that's a very particular kind of art in this business. What is kind of your process with that generally? How does that kind of factor into the trajectory of your career as a whole as well? Because it's a very there's not a whole lot of people that do that kind of thing on a constant basis.
Yeah, the truth of the matter is, Chris, that I'm coming to a sense of peace with my voice matching ability. And what I mean by that is I have struggled for years to not be the voice match guy because I don't feel like my voice is that versatile. And yet, if I'm honest, like at least 70%, if not 80% of everything I've ever booked is sounding like somebody else.
Right,
so
I
have to make peace with that. I have to make peace with the fact that I may not want to be the voice match guy, but I guess I am one of those voice match guys. And what I would say in terms of that, I've hesitated to teach it. Like when I teach and coach, I don't come at voice matching as a technique because I don't have a technique. I learn by ear. But I will say this, having looked into it and studied it now for myself and trying to get better at it, it comes down to a couple of things. For me, what helped was to break down the elements of what someone's voice is. You've got what is their general pitch range? What is their general level of texture? What's their kind of like, where in their skull cavity do they resonate their voice? Do they send their voice through their nose? Do they go front of the mouth? Are they swallowing everything back here like this? And that becomes like the first mechanics that I start to pick apart. So like for Robert Downey Jr., for example, and I'll do him as a parlor trick because I've done Jack Black for years and
Of course.
Trying to bring you fresh content, Chris. Fresh content. So, like, for Robert Downey Jr., one of the things I noticed is that in his pronunciation, he sends everything kind of up into his hard palate, almost into his nose, but not quite. And he's got, kind of like Jack, he's kind of got this lateral thing going on. So you marry that with his speech pattern of starting a phrase and then pausing and then catching up really fast afterwards. And you've got
almost Shatner elements to it.
And you've got Robert Downey Jr.
Which I have to say as an aside, I considered it like a victory for our whole business when What If worked out for you. Because I gotta say, like, there's been so many, every Marvel character has had upwards of probably 5 different people playing them. Except for maybe Hulk, because I think Fred has that job pretty much for like 90% of the time.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah, sure enough. But especially when it came to with What If, where it's like, it's not like the cartoon series like Avengers Assemble and stuff, where it's like, for a lot of them were more like, what's the term, like spiritual matches, right. I think was something floated. Yeah, something like that, where like, Travis's Thor is not quite Chris Hemsworth, but it's very much the Thor character, right. Et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that, as far as I've seen, and there's quite a few of our voiceover colleagues that are in What If, for the folks that didn't want to reprise from the live action. But the fact that there's a through line with you goes to show of like, wow, yeah, no, there's power to the non-celebrity guys like us down here that are, doing the cartoons and everything. Beyond when celebs want to dip their toes into cartoons as well. That's another thing.
By the time this interview airs, there's already been a big kerfluffle about the summer movie, The Legion of Super Pets, and I think it was Gizmodo posted an article that was basically like, celebrity voice acting has to evolve or die. And that was their headline. And it was basically how guys like you and I and our other blue collar working voice actor, fellow actors, both male and female, we have a skill set that isn't being showcased, and it's simply for name recognition, where that's being sacrificed for name recognition. And I hope by the time this interview airs, like, that there will be some significant pushback, based on that. Just because, you do get somebody like a Travis Willingham in the booth, and he can do a damn good Thor. You get somebody like a Fred Tatasciore, and Fred actually roared, if I can say so, he roared for the Hulk in every film iteration of the Hulk. It was him and some other person. They were like combining vocals to get that sonorous roar. And so Fred was even playing the Hulk on screen when he wasn't playing the Hulk in animation. Like, there's just so much talent out there, and there are so few people. There are celebrities who get it and can do it, but there are fewer and further between than I think studios realize. 'Cause you get, just because this is a dead horse and I won't make any enemies by saying this, you go back to like 98, I think it's 98 or 97, and you get Brad Pitt as Sinbad, for DreamWorks. That was the least inspired, flattest cardboard performance ever. And it showed in the box office. Like, that film was a disaster. And it's because they cast the pretty boy and then didn't show his face.
Well, and I like to think also, as things are changing, cause, God, I hope I don't get too much crap for this, but I like the Mario movie and some of the response to that, where it's like, Charles Martinet is going to be in it, as something, shrug, and it's like, cool. Meanwhile, shortly after that, and actually by the time this is out, the new Dragon Ball Z movie will have been airing, and Charles played a major named character in it.
Wow.
And was featured, and the response to that was incredible, and stuff like that, which I want to talk about some anime stuff a little bit later, but like, in that case where like, they're not stuffing celebrities unless it's a Ghibli film. They don't care anyway. They're just having the people from the show reprise anyway.
Right.
And what I want to hope is, especially with the advent of things like, I keep coming back to Travis, but I think of Matt and all the Critical Role guys, where it's like, they're, in my eyes, I would say that they're kind of like celebrity stars that like you could put them in an animated film and that would get a whole generation of people to want to go see something with them. And they're not doing, Hollywood movies, but that's a whole nother, there's so many offshoots of this I could rant and rave about forever,
I hear you, man. I hear you. And here's what I will say for anybody who's listening to your podcast, that is an aspiring voice actor or is somebody who's already trying to make their way in the business. Don't be afraid to create your own content. You never know. You never know what's going to fly. Obviously, there are only so many hours in a day, but if you love playing D&D, stream it. If you love, playing video games, stream them. You never know when something that you do as a person, some hobby that you have, will strike a chord with the right audience. And those of us who are truly creatives, like, none of us like to do stuff half-ass. So put your best foot forward when you're doing it. If you love making short comedy videos like Vine used to be or like TikTok is now, go do it. Because that, you never know how that's going to influence your ability to launch in what you really wanted to do. I look at Critical Role and I think there's just a group of folks who were already making it. They were happy in their careers, doing anime, directing video games, doing, prelay, doing everything that was coming at them as voice actors. And then like, yeah, but we also play D&D, and wouldn't it be cool if we just let everybody sit in on our D&D campaigns. And all of a sudden, it just got better and better and better and better and better. And then production value got put in, and then, Nerdist picked them up, and then, they launched, and now they've got an animated series. And it all started from these folks who just wanted to let people in on what they did in their free time.
Yeah, and just had fun and have incredible talent. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say in that. I mean, for myself, I've created stuff my whole life, long before I did any performance stuff. I think of other people that are working a lot right now. I mean, Sungwon Cho. I don't even think that he has like any kind of like professional acting or not professional, traditional acting background in terms of like theater or radio or anything. He just has a knack for being super entertaining, doing a lot of great voices, and he's just a cool guy that everybody gets really excited to want to work with, and for good reason. And he's doing really well for himself. So absolutely, I would echo that 100%. Jumping off of that too, because you have your own podcast.
I do.
You have a Twilight Zone inspired kind of like the kids maybe would identify it as a creepypasta.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a modern day like creepypasta. We don't have any versions of Jeff the Killer on there or the Smiling Dog or Slenderman, but we do. I love the Twilight Zone. I love horror anthologies like Tales from the Dark Side. By the time this airs, I'm hoping that we'll have a few more episodes out. I've just spent some time over the summer getting casts together and recording. I have not had you on yet, but you will be in a cast very soon.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's no great favor. I don't pay anybody. So, it's a favor you're doing for me. But,
cool.
But yeah, anyway, I was doing some narration for the No Sleep podcast, which is another titan of horror fiction. That's really a lot of like creepypasta. I mean, it started literally as the No Sleep subreddit, which is a place for people to post stories and scary stories. And usually there's some vibe of this really happened to me kind of a thing amongst that subreddit. And so some enterprising producer out of Canada, a really wonderful man named David Cummings, worked a deal out with some creators and started producing audio fiction versions of these stories on the subreddit. And now it's become its own thing. They have a contribution system. They rarely actually go back to the Reddit anymore. It's mostly, original contributions. And anyway, I love horror, so I started volunteering for them for free, and then realized, I really love audio drama. I love old time radio. That's one of my favorite things. It's one of the things I wish was back around. And I got my wish. Like with the advent of not the advent, but with the resurgence and the renaissance of podcasting, I would say in the last 5 to 7 years, like, there is now a forum and there's a form and there's a venue for audio drama and audio comedy, and those radio stars of yore can be emulated again. And so I'm like, why wouldn't I do this? And I reached out to some of my animation writer friends and I'm like, would you like to write an episode of The Twilight Zone? And most of them jumped at the chance. Most of them were like, yeah, it would actually. That sounds really fun. And so it's an anthology. It's completely, each individual episode's a one shot. There's no connective tissue. I think that, we're about to launch these last batch of episodes will be our third season. And I'm excited. I mean, we've got all kinds of really fun tales about, everything from haunted houses to werewolves to, cannibals and all kinds of fun stuff.
The internet, the scariest monster of our time.
The scariest monster of our time. Before we go too much farther, you asked me about voice matching. There is something I wanted to give any and all of your listeners, if I can backtrack to that.
Sure, please.
So in terms of voice matching, one of the most important things that any talent can do, at least from my perspective, because this is how I got my Kung Fu Panda job. I didn't have a Jack Black voice match at the time, as you've already pointed out. But James picked up on something, and I want to think that it's that he picked up on the fact that my voice and Jack's voice both sit in the same section of the orchestra. So when you're approaching voice match, as much as you might think the call is to be a chameleon, one of the most important things you can do is identify what part of the orchestra am I in and what other actors, famous or not, sit in that section of the orchestra, right? If I have a lot of wind in my, or a lot of air that passes through when I talk, let's say I have a natural rasp like this, like if this was my voice, like a TJ Miller or a Matt, what's Matt's last name? He was Badger on, what's it called?
Matt Jones.
Yeah, Matt Jones.
Breaking Bad.
Like if I'm Matt Jones like this, then that's who I would go for first, right? Because they sit in my section of the orchestra. Mm-hmm. It's always going to be easier for a trombone is not a trumpet, but it's going to be easier for a trombone to sound like a trumpet than it will a piano.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Well, and it's funny too, because my one and only, I don't even think I've told this story before, but my one and only, story with that was I had like a last second audition. It was like, hey, match this clip from a movie. I didn't know who it was or what it was for. I got the call the next morning and it turned out it was Dacre Montgomery. People know him for, he was Billy in Stranger Things, but this was for the Power Rangers movie, the recent kind of like more, quote unquote gritty one.
Sure.
And that was by complete just like, okay, they just think maybe I can do that. I have no idea. I wasn't super familiar with the actor's work. And it just so happened that like I was close enough and I just did some scratch stuff for like a preview screening. They had some of the early footage of them in the suits and everything. They couldn't call them in at the time. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But that was actually one of the first things that made me think of your exact point. Cause I had always known like guys like, Jeff Bennett and Jess Harnell were like, they're great impressionists as well. Absolutely. But even also some of their impressions are also kind of more on like the cartoony side that would fit into like an Animaniacs episode or whatever. And then we think of, James is like, Arnold Taylor is insane with the amount that he can do and just how much. And even then too, you worked on Kingdom Hearts.
I did.
You did the Pirates of the Caribbean, level, I believe, right? And, I remember because James was the Johnny Depp guy for the longest time.
He was.
I don't remember the gentleman's name, but there's a new guy that I believe is doing Captain Jack Sparrow and all that stuff. And he just naturally happens to sound like Johnny Depp.
Right.
And I heard him and I'm like, oh wow. So, even that kind of thing. And that's happened a few times I've noticed with certain, celebs and various things like that too. So that is one of those things I think is, it's cool to have in the back pocket and the people that like really make a big thing out of that, as a part of their career, I'm amazed by.
Right.
But I think what you talk about where it's like, it's also good to be realistic about like, if you're going to aim for something like have it be as close to naturally as possible so that you're not like spending 1,000 years. Like, I don't know, Mick, could I do Meryl Streep? I think if I worked at it hard enough.
If you work at it hard enough, maybe. Maybe. Yeah, I just think, there are some people that are vocal chameleons and that can change the way they speak. I would consider myself to some degree one of them. And there is merit in that. And to your point, like it's all your greatest ability to book is always going to be your greatest amount of credibility with your least amount of effort. So if I've got great credibility, but you can hear me working my ass off to sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger because I'm doing the thing and I've got the accent and I'm also trying to change the way I'm doing my vowels. And you just hire a guy from Austria who sounds like Arnold. Like, which one of us sounds effortless?
Absolutely.
And the effortless guy, if all things are equal, the effortless guy's going to get it. And he should get it.
Of course. Well, there's a lot of things like that I think now that are going in that way where like they do go for, no, we want the authentic, which I think is ultimately better. That's a whole nother, I know we could talk for hours about literally everything.
We really can.
Well, here's something, shifting gears. I was talking a little earlier about, some anime stuff.
Sure.
And this will actually also segue nicely into, one of the reasons why actually we led to doing this interview together. So, what led to you getting into, dubbing work and particularly with anime stuff?
At the time, I was with a smaller agent than I am now, and I'm with Atlas Talent now, which is a big voiceover agency on both coasts. But at the time, I was with a smaller boutique agency, and I wasn't getting a lot of work. And this particular agency, they had handled me for all my beginning Kung Fu Panda stuff, and were doing well with me. I was making a name for myself in what anime voice actors and dubbing actors call prelay, or what you might know as traditional cartoons. I was doing okay in cartoons, but even though I was doing okay, there were still auditions that other friends of mine that were at other agencies are like, "Oh, did you read on this?" And I'm like, "I didn't even hear about that." And so I'd have to call my agent, and the agent would go, "What? Who's casting that? Do you know who's casting that? Cause I'll email him right now." And so I'd have to do all the footwork. And I just wasn't getting a whole lot of, this is just a way of saying I wasn't getting a whole lot of auditions, and I wasn't getting a whole lot of work. And so, I had done something over at Studiopolis. And I knew that Jamie Simone kind of ran his own shop there in terms of casting certain projects. He was casting director oftentimes, or he was, often hired to both cast and produce the show. And I just sent him a note because he had remarked, this is years ago, I did Earth's Mightiest Heroes.
That's right.
I was, the computer voice of Scuttlebutt, the, sentient ship that Beta Ray Bill flies in the Beta Ray Bill episode of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. So Jamie had mentioned I did a good job or something, and, I've of course green behind the ears. So I'm like, "Oh, thank you, Mr. Simone. Thanks so much. I really like being here." But I went ahead and shot him an email. I figured out what the email address would be for him and, shot him an email, maybe a couple of years later, and just said, "Hey, Jamie, I'm on this show. I'm doing this right now. I've been doing Kung Fu Panda, and, I'm just looking to diversify my portfolio. I would love to get into dubbing, if you have room for me on the roster." And nothing came of it right away, but because also I was completely unskilled at the time, completely inexperienced. The most I had done was some ADR work for Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness, but most of that was efforts, and I was tracking myself and my own performance. And it's just not the same. It's just not the same.
Yeah. Correct.
So, so that's kind of how I got in it. And, just to be frank with your listening audience, I hope that they will appreciate this. Like, I was in a bad way financially. It wasn't that I was, I wasn't bleeding money, and I was okay. I had roof over my head, all that stuff, but I was in a place where I'm like, I'm not working enough. So maybe if I do some dubbing gigs, if I get one dubbing gig that's the right gig, maybe I can go to do this convention thing on the weekends, because, Robbie Damon's making tons of money. And
yeah, all the lava guys.
All those lava guys, two of which were studying with me at the time.
Fun. Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
So I was just, between teaching, I had already started my teaching business, but between teaching and voice acting, it just wasn't bringing in the kind of money that I felt like I needed, especially as I was getting ready to get married and that kind of thing. So I was hoping to get on the convention scene. And the reason why I hope that's encouraging to some of the listeners is, we all go through those hard times. We all go through those dry spells where it seems like you can't get arrested in this town, much less book a show. And there are times that you do things that you didn't expect to do to make ends meet. And for me, like, dubbing was one of those things that I was like, okay, my ultimate goal here is maybe to get to conventions. But I'll take anything. I'll take anything they want to bring my way. And, in the meantime, I ended up booking, I think it was just after I moved to Atlas, I ended up booking Avengers, Assemble for Disney, or for Marvel Animation at the time. Yep. And so Jamie finally pulled the dubbing card. He's like, "Well, we've got this Japanese anime that's based on the Avengers that's, getting localized here, and there's 85 episodes, and we want to know if you want to play Iron Man in it." And I'm like, sure. And for me, it was obviously an opportunity to practice, honing and making consistent my version of Iron Man in animation. But it was also, that's where I cut my teeth on the really specific skills that are required for acting in pre-recorded animation, in pre-drawn animation, is, just having to match that lip flap and having to try to tailor a performance and not lose the acting of it. And I gained an immense respect for all of my peers that ended up, doing anime as a career choice or to make ends meet or to whatever degree they had found success, right? Whether they were dipping their toes in it or they were long established talent. Like I realized this is really hard. This is a hard job and it requires specific skills. I'll never forget, and I've told this story before, I'll tell it again. I'll never forget, I was feeling full of myself and I thought, hey, I'm doing pretty good. You know, I'm matching the lip flap and getting my style down. I think it's going to be good. And I asked Kirk Thornton, longtime anime actor and voice director on this Avengers, Future Avengers is the name of the anime. Voice director on Future Avengers, talking about playing Tony Stark and playing Iron Man and stuff. And I'm like, I realize that I have some room to grow and I certainly don't feel like I'm done, but I feel like I've made some progress now. And he goes, oh, well, yeah, you're great when the mask is down.
Oh my God, Kirk. That sounds like him. Yeah.
I was like, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the lip flap's not a problem, you're great. You're great. I have since, worked on other projects. I've done stuff for Funimation. I've done, I've gone outside of Studiopolis in terms of dubbing and other projects. And I found my way. I'm able to get that take that sinks, but man.
That One Piece movie character was a hoot. That crazy guy from the Stampede film. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I had a great time. Yeah. Buena Festa is one of my favorites.
Hell yeah. It's so funny too, and I'm very glad that of course Jamie was part of this conversation because I recall when Wolverine and the X-Men was happening. Oh, yeah. I was in early college at the time, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm hearing all these like anime guys that I knew as major characters in this American cartoon. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And I realize now the through line of like a lot of the ADR guys that Jamie worked with for years in the late 90s, early 2000s were people in mind for when he started doing it, because so much of the Marvel stuff happens at Studiopolis and so much of it has been through his hands. Absolutely. Yeah. And then of course the fact that like, not in absolutely every character, but to see the through line of the prelay cast of like Avengers Assemble and otherwise in those couple of Marvel anime as well, with how many like, yeah, I'll do this. Sure. I like working with you guys. Yeah. I like playing this character. It's a gig. And the other thing is there's on the reverse of that, while there were so many folks, like Travis again, Laura, Troy Baker, who started in anime. I remember when he started in anime like a billion years ago. Now he's, Mr. $1 Million Man guy. And then now I meet prelay animation folks, that are like, I want to do anime. That are like now getting, and not even just necessarily for, certainly the convention thing is a nice perk if you get a character that can get you there, but just in general, like, it's another gig. Bill Salyers, Kathy Cavadini from Powerpuff Girls, people like that, I'm hearing them in stuff. And which this segues into something very important, because I've been telling friends of mine when I started noticing that, I'm like, yo, we gotta up our game. Because if folks that are that good that have been doing this, 5 times longer than we have at all, and they're going to start getting into dubbing, the competition is going to be a lot harder.
A lot harder.
And so something that I was very happy to see, a week or two before we did this interview, you were talking on Twitter about, hey, there's so many folks out there, myself included, that started in the anime dubbing and low budget indie video game, non-union stuff, that I know want to break into doing original cartoons and, ensemble prelay stuff. Myself included and a few of my friends, like we've gotten to dip our toes in that world somewhat. Sure. Here and there. I did OKKO on Cartoon Network for 3 years, which that was a dream because that was my one window into this is the big thing. This is the top of the top kind of thing that you get guys like you get to do a lot. And you, cause you've been teaching for many years, of course, but you were putting on interest about, getting people to kind of make that step into that world more so. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. What's interesting, here's something that I've noticed when I started doing dubbing, there were basically, it was like a Venn diagram. There were 2 communities and there was a little portion of overlap. You had, and to a certain extent, you still have this. You have your anime and dubbing community, which is all your actors out of Texas and across the nation that Funimation and Viz and, Inyo and Navi Post that they all rely upon, and not just Texas but also LA based. But they specialize in dubbing, and then you had your community of like voiceover cartoon legends that were working in the industry. Everybody from a Jess Harnell or a Rob Paulson to a Maurice LaMarche to a Jim Cummings and a Brian Cummings and and I found myself kind of in the middle section of that Venn diagram along with a few other people that we were some of those folks who were navigating back and forth. But it seemed like both of these communities were really separate, not by choice, but just by nature of the job, and nature of the work requirement and everything else. And I went to dinner with a mutual friend, you might know Christopher Swindle. He's one of my oldest friends in the business. We actually met at Fresno City College in like 1993.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, he's one of my oldest friends. And so we were at dinner one time and he was talking about, being on Twitter and being in both of these communities and noticing how many folks who were, going to cons and doing the anime thing and who had lots of, success with certain fandoms through their dubbing projects actually came out to LA to try to get into cartoons and haven't been able to make headway or tailway in there. And so I thought, well, as a teacher, my job, if I want to be a good teacher, my job is to stay as relevant and fresh as possible to what's going on in the market. And I can tell you from my own personal observation, this is not based on, poll data or sociology. It's just armchair observation. Like casting has changed so much in the last 10 years. Like when I got here in 2004, the expectation was still that there were 50 to 75 people that did all the work in town. And yes, there was a little bit of growing celebrity encroachment. Yes, we had lost features after Robin Williams in the 90s. But we weren't counting on those anyway. We're talking like TV episodics, kids, Saturday morning cartoons kind of fare. It's all going to be the same 75 people. And there's a certain way to get a seat at that table. You got to have your demo that showcases your versatility. You got to have your Rolodex of 40 characters. You got to work in those places and you got to have your impressions. I think one of the one of the most recent or more recent success stories about that you can look at is Eric Bauza. Eric Bauza is an animator turned voice actor, and it's because he's great. And he's that guy that could be on 40 different shows and do, 14 sessions a week. But as I was coming to town in 2004, Tara Strong was in 12 shows at one time, and Tom Kenny was all over the place, and you still had these mega stars or mega workers, I should say, in voice acting. And since then, it's changed so much. With the confluence of all media, you have casting throwing a much wider net at a much bigger ocean. So, if I'm getting sides from DreamWorks Television Animation, not to break any NDAs, but if that studio is sending me sides, then usually their sides with the instructions for submission say, label your file, your name, your agent name, the character name, and what city you're in. If they're asking for city on mainline stuff that used to only go to 75 people, that's an indicator that you're swimming in a much wider ocean now. And beyond that, you have more with the confluence of all media. Now, I don't know how the recent kerfluffle with HBO and Netflix and all the streaming services is going to pan out. But I will say up until the point of this interview, with everything tending to go towards streaming, right? There's no more lanes. It used to be you're a film actor, and if you're not a film actor, then you're television. And if you're television, you're going to be a character actor, you're going to be a lead. You're going to be a daytime television actor, you're going to be an evening television, primetime television actor. You're going to be a character, you're going to be a recurring, there were very clear striations in Hollywood. And as everything started going to streaming and as the algorithms started deciding, more and more celebrities were like, I don't mind doing TV. I mean, if it's going to be an 8-episode Netflix show and it's going to grab everybody's attention, why wouldn't I want to be on House of Cards?
Yeah,
right? Why
absolutely.
wouldn't I want to be on Orange is the New Black? I'm not too snobby to get paid. So, so those striations, that classism that was built in is gone. So now, from the voiceover perspective, you've got studios casting a wide net because you can record from anywhere in the nation, in the world, actually. If you have good enough technology, you can record anywhere in the world. So now tell me what city you're in. So that's bottom up, right? People we've never heard of before out of Chicago and New York and Atlanta and Mudlick, Kentucky and Portland, Maine and all of these other places that are now getting exposure to animation sides. But now you've also got jobs being offer only to celebrities because there's still the perception that those celebrity names bring audiences with them and put butts in seats. As you may know, it's already been on for, I want to say 3 months by the time this interview comes out. There's a Kung-Fu Panda TV show on Netflix. That TV show was originally slated just to be another episodic offering, and Jack Black came in and said, I want it. I want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
So now it's this big thing. And I can tell you just from some connections that I have with producers and showrunners on the inside, like it was just pitched as like a third show to build on the momentum of Kung Fu Panda Paws of Destiny. And that's not to throw any shade at anybody. That's my point here is that it was set for a specific expectation with a specific budget, with a specific like TV sensibility. And I think the original thought was we're just going to get Mick or some other impersonator to just come in and play Poe because this is kind of small potatoes. But then to have Jack come in and elevate the whole thing, it's this big Netflix to do now. And you're seeing that happen a lot. Monsters at Work is another great example. The Monsters at Work show starred Billy Crystal and John Goodman. These are A-list celebrities. What are they doing episodic children's television for a streaming service?
Yeah. Well, and because it's funny, Chris Swindle is the best John Goodman I've ever heard in my life as well, because I've heard that too, yeah. And even on the Kung Fu Panda thing, I remember I had a buddy that interned at Nickelodeon when they were doing Legends of Awesomeness at the time. They might have even met you while they were there briefly, Edward Bosco.
Okay. He
was telling me about when they got Lucy Liu. I don't think anybody expected to actually get Lucy Liu for Viper.
100%.
All right. So.
Yeah, even back then it was starting to happen. And more and more celebrity encroachment from above as well as, unnamed talent from below has turned that table that you were trying to get a seat at into a banquet hall full of tables. And in terms of offering the prelay class, my thought was, I think I can identify a few things that some of my friends who work all the time in dubbing, might be up against that are holding them back. And so, and again, my plan was just to teach a webinar and then for anybody who was interested to actually do a class, a skills building class for some of the areas that I might identify in the webinar. But if only I ever got a webinar out of this, I felt like there are some things I would love to say to Chris Niosi, to Chris Hackney, to Brandon Winkler, to, Jeremy Lee, to, Erica Harlacher, like all of these talents who I know are immensely talented people who can do all kinds of things and have found themselves in this niche market. There are some basic principles I'd love to lay out just to refresh the perspective here on what not only casting directors are looking for in a read, but also how to best position yourself to do the work you want to do. I don't mean to steal my own thunder for my webinar, but I will say this because it was for working pros only, like attendance was limited. What I will say to the general audience is when grandma used to say, dress for the job you want, she wasn't kidding.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
And that applies to how one presents oneself professionally in the business. It's important to be seen as the guy or the gal who can do X, Y, Z. And that's as much image as it is, payoff, like your ability to do it, your skills and your image to do those skills. Speaking of James from earlier, James Arnold Taylor, he told me a story that I will never, ever forget. There was somebody at his agency when he was with DPN. This was way back in the day. I think it was still ICM Talent at the time.
Yeah.
Back before DPN became its own shop and it was still part of ICM, International Creative Management. They would every year, the voiceover agency department would have their big client barbecue and they'd rent out a park and they'd have the thing. And there was some guy, we'll call him Gary. I don't know what his name was. I don't think it was Gary. I'm making that up, but I will tell you, I've never forgotten the story. But just to protect the innocent, we'll call him Gary. And Gary every year was in charge of the grilling of the hot dogs and hamburgers. Like every year, Gary was on point to be the barbecue guy for the big agency barbecue. And I'll never forget James saying, I never see Gary at my partner reads. I never see him in the waiting room. I never see Gary reading on stuff, but I always see Gary at the barbecue. And that's why I don't ever volunteer to be the hot dog guy at the barbecue. Not because I'm above doing it, not because I wouldn't mind cooking for my friends, and that's fine. That the work doesn't bother me. But I don't ever want to be seen as the hot dog guy when I want you to see me as a money-making client. Mm-hmm. This is one of our superstars. This is one of our bookers. This is one of our go-to guys. I think guys like James, guys like me, we work really hard to keep that image as consistent as possible in our workaday worlds. I don't advertise for my teaching business. I mean, I will mention it in podcasts. So my website is out there. Anybody can look me up. Anybody can book with me. I actually do work with rank amateurs, but I don't buy advertising somewhere. I don't do free webinars to get people in and just, see if I can, get them on a class in terms of beginners and that kind of thing. I'm not a VO shop. Why? Because there's a certain caliber of talent, A, I'd like to work with, and B, there's a certain amount of prestige that comes with being a referral only business. And by being referral only, I've gotten one of the best reputations in town. I've had Cartoon Network send their promo guide to me for coaching. I've had show creators from various shows sent to me because they insisted on doing their own voices for their characters and just needed some help being directed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've really worked, with a huge cadre of people, and it's been amazing. And that image has been carefully curated. I'm not your mass market Edge Studio VO. I'm not Kalmanson. I'm not.
I've been
right?
there.
I'm not one of these. I'm a boutique agency, and I work a certain way, and I expect a certain caliber out of the people that. And I'm not even talking about talent or ability to perform, but a certain level of commitment to doing this. I want everything that has my name on it to be of a certain quality, and that's as much image. So, when it comes down to dubbing and prelay or traditional cartoons, Western cartoons, the blowback on that is you dress for the job you want and you are strategic with how you present yourself. I don't want to steal my own thunder for my webinar, so that's as deep as I really want to go. But what I will say is,
no, that's fair.
If you extrapolate some of those things, you then just go, yeah, I'll tell you something that doesn't have to do with dubbing and has to do with just middle market voiceover talent. Okay. So there's voiceover talent all over the United States. And I'll just deal with the United States. I mean, this is a phenomenon all over the world, really, but just with the U.S. as a market, there are striations of voice acting talent. You've got your LA top tier actors, on to celebrities. You've got the whole LA market thing. You've got your New York market, and you've got a lot of what I would call, middle of the road, middle America voice talent. And one of the things that I try to tell my students is when they're putting their branding materials together, when they're putting together their website, when they're printing their business cards, when they're, having their demos made and anything that is a visual, I say avoid the word voiceovers plural. Don't ever put that on your business card. The last thing that I want to see on your business card is Chris Niosi, quality voiceovers, fresh, hot voiceovers. Just the use of the S on the word voiceovers immediately tells the recipient of that information that you're a middle tier talent.
Yeah.
Because only middle tier talent use the word voiceover. One of the things that grabbed me, and I'm going to use a little language here, so warning, if you're listening to this with your kids, I'm sorry, I'm going to drop an F-bomb. You've been warned. But I remember, like, everybody in classes that I was taking at the time was like, well, what do you do with your slate? How do you slate? Do you slate in character? Do you slate not in character? Do you slate, kind of going into character? Because all the casting directors have things that they want, and they all want it different. And everyone's pulling their hair, like, getting the right slate is going to book you the role. And I, at one point I went, you know who doesn't worry about his slate? John fucking DiMaggio. John DiMaggio doesn't worry about his slate. John DiMaggio could get on there and go, listen, assholes, I'm John DiMaggio, and just do his thing. If he wanted to. I'm not saying that he does, and John, please don't come after me, because I'm not saying that you do that. I'm saying you could do that, and it wouldn't ruin your chance.
I have a family, don't kill me.
Please, for the love. But, like, you could do that because you're John fucking DiMaggio. Sorry, there's 2 F-bombs, but...
No, throw more in, please.
That feeling of, wait a minute, I'm concentrating on the wrong thing. I'm going to dress for the job I want. I don't even know if John DiMaggio has a website. Now, I tried Googling. I didn't see one, but he might have one now. I don't know. I know other pros that do. Kari Walgren does. I do. Pat Fraley does, because he also teaches. Like, there are definitely people that have web presences for their marketing and fandom and all that stuff, that are at that John DiMaggio level. But what really sank in for me was, start dressing for the job you want. Don't worry about the slate, because the slate doesn't fucking matter. All that matters is they hear your name. And there have been times that I've blown the slate and just left it in there. Actually booked something, that was then recast and repackaged, and it happens to all of us. We all book stuff that we are then replaced on. But I first I booked something, and I remember totally blowing the name of the character. I was like, this is Mick Wingert as Gabby, I don't know, but here you go. And I just went into it. And it was so fun. It tickled me so much that on that particular audition, I left the flub and the whole little comedy bit I did about the flub, and I still booked the role. Like, it didn't hurt me. Now, there are other times that I may not even slate. And there are other times that I will slate in character or out of character, just whatever strikes me. And I've never felt like, and I've never had an agent come back and say, well, they really love the audition and they think you're right for the role, but what the hell was that slate?
Or you could be like Ben, where I remember he had a story about he booked a job off of his slate somehow because of how insane. I was gonna say that Grandma was right when she said dress for the job was a great kind of words to live by thing to go out on, but I think don't worry about the fucking slate is a better one. Oh my God. I know we're pretty much just out of time, so we can wrap things up here. But Mick, thank you very much for giving me an hour of your very busy schedule.
My pleasure, Chris. My pleasure, really. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. I am looking forward to the webinar and hopefully that upcoming class as well. That will have been, I think, passed by the time that this interview comes out, because this will be months later. But everybody can follow you. Are you just Mick Wingert on Twitter?
Yeah,
I think,
I haven't killed the right person, or I haven't decoded the Da Vinci Code to get the blue check mark, but I'm at Mick Wingert. That's really me.
That means you don't exist actually,
right.
Because you don't have the blue.
That's right. I'm not a real person, but it is really, if you follow at Mick Wingert on Twitter or on Instagram or both of them, you will get me and my feeds.
And is your podcast on your website as well?
I don't know if it is on my website, but it's called The Hidden Frequencies, which is kind of my audio version of The Twilight Zone. So thehiddenfrequencies.com. Thehiddenfrequencies.com. All one word.
Hell yeah. Awesome. Thank you everybody for listening. Please go check Mick out. I hope that everybody learned something today, because I certainly did. I will not announce who the next one is, because I don't know for sure who the next one is going to be, sadly. I have a couple people waiting to be scheduled soon. But, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Mick, for being my guest. We will see you all in the next one, and keep talking pretty, everybody. Bye.